Finding sources of solace and direction is crucial to assisting us in navigating these challenging emotions in a world that is becoming more and more unpredictable and where dread and worry often overwhelm us. Millions of individuals have found courage and hope in Bible texts throughout the ages. We'll look at how these old writings are still relevant today and how they might provide healing and tranquility in our video. Relief that we seek in our daily lives since time immemorial. Bible verses have been used not only as worship texts, but also as guides in times of fear and despair. Every verse we will share today is rooted in historical situations where faith was tested and God's word offered comfort and direction throughout history. These verses have been interpreted and reinterpreted, adapting to the changing circumstances and continuing their influence in various eras and cultures. I invite you to reflect on your own challenges and fears as we go along this journey. Consider how these verses can be applied not only in a biblical context, but in your personal life today. Break down each of these verses, exploring their deeper meaning, and how we can integrate these teachings into our daily lives to face our fears and find that lasting hope that we all need. I'm sure you'll find inspiration and comfort in the words we're going to share. If it's your first time on our channel, I invite you to subscribe and share the video with your loved ones. Let's begin with the first one. Verse 9 of Joshua 1 verse 11. The passage in Joshua 1 is rich in historical background and significance. Joshua took over as the leader of the Israelites when Moses passed away, and his job was to lead them, Israelites, to the Promised Land. This was not an easy time, as Joshua had the responsibility of leading a people who had been wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. The transition of leadership generated uncertainty in both Joshua and the people. The verse begins with God reaffirming to Joshua that he was chosen for this mission, reminding him that his calling is not accidental, but divine. The first part of the verse does not "I have commanded you." I underscore the divine authority behind the command. God is reminding Joshua that his leadership and mission are not accidental, but part of a divine plan. This statement is crucial as it grants Joshua the assurance that his role has a greater purpose. God's authority gives him legitimacy and strength to carry out his mission. Then God commands Joshua to be strong and courageous. These qualities are essential for any leader, but especially for someone in Joshua's position. Strength and courage are not only desirable qualities, but necessary to meet the challenges of leading an entire people through unknown territories and conquering new lands. Joshua must possess these attributes according to God in order to complete his task. Facing fear is another essential component of the text, which reads, "Do not be afraid or fearful." Joshua is explicitly urged not to allow fear to immobilize him. Although fear is a normal and human reaction, it can also be crippling. God is reminding Joshua that he shouldn't let fear hold him back or cause him to flee. Joshua's attitude to confront his worries with courage and action is strengthened by this advice. One of the verse's most consoling aspects is the assurance of God's ever-present presence. "Because the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go," assures Joshua that no matter where he goes, God will be with him. This promise of companionship and unconditional support provides a source of comfort and strength. God guarantees his constant presence by offering guidance and protection every step of the way. Throughout the Bible, we find numerous examples of God supporting his people in times of difficulty. This constant presence of God is seen in stories such as that of Moses, David, and many other biblical leaders who faced monumental challenges with the certainty that God was with them. These biblical examples reinforce God's promise to Joshua and all believers. Applying this verse in modern life is equally relevant. The exhortation to be strong and courageous can apply to various contemporary situations, such as facing challenges at work, in personal relationships, or in important decisions. Courage and strength are needed today to face the obstacles that life presents. To us, this verse reminds us that, just like Joshua, we can find the strength in our faith to overcome our difficulties. There are countless practical examples of people who have overcome great fears by trusting in their faith, stories of people who have faced illness, loss, or significant change, and like their faith in God provided them with the strength to move forward. They are inspiring testimonies. These stories show us that faith in God can be a powerful source of strength and courage in the darkest of times. Spiritual reflection and meditation are essential practices to internalize and apply this verse in our daily lives. Prayer is a powerful tool to ask for strength and courage in times of fear. Meditate on God's Word. Reflect, including meditation techniques, such as contemplative reading, can be very helpful. Taking the time to read and reflect on Bible verses, allowing their words to penetrate deeply into our hearts and minds, can provide us with lasting peace and strength. These practices help us stay connected to God and remember His promise to be with God. We are always giving ourselves the strength to face any challenge. Number 2, Psalm chapter 27, verse 1. Psalm 271, written by King David, is a deep reflection of his trust in God. David, known to be a man after God's own heart, lived through many dangerous situations that tested his faith. This particular psalm is born from his personal experiences, possibly during his escapes from King Saul and his own son Absalom. Moments when his life was in jeopardy, David's relationship with God was his anchor. In these turbulent times, David begins the verse with a powerful statement: "The Lord is my light and my salvation." Here the light symbolizes guidance and the truth God provides in times of darkness and confusion. David found clarity and direction in God's salvation, on the other hand, refers to the deliverance from danger. David is affirming that God is the one who saves him from all his adversities. This double image of light and salvation encapsulates David's total trust in God. The rhetorical question that follows, "Whom shall I fear?" is an affirmation of his unwavering faith. This question does not seek an answer, but reinforces the idea that with God by his side, David has nothing to fear. It is a direct challenge to whatever fear or anxiety might arise from stating this. David is demonstrating that his trust in God is stronger than any external threat. The second part of the verse, "The Lord is the strength of my life," further reinforces this confidence. The strength here refers to the inner strength and stability that come from a close relationship with God. David recognizes that his strength does not come from himself, but from God. Your faith in God, this divine strength, allowed you to face giants, flee powerful enemies, and maintain your faith, even in the darkest moments of your life. We can apply this verse in our modern life by seeing God as our light and salvation in difficult times, facing current issues such as illness, financial problems, or personal conflicts with the confidence that God will guide and save us. Can be a transformative practice to remember that God is our light, can help us find clarity and direction in the midst of confusion, while trusting in His salvation gives us hope that we will be delivered from our difficulties. There are countless contemporary examples of people who have experienced God's protection and guidance in their lives, stories of individuals who have overcome great adversity because of their faith in God can serve as inspiration and strength for us. These testimonies remind us that God's presence and power are real and active in our lives today, just as they were in David's time. Spiritual reflection and meditation on this verse can help us internalize its teachings. Spending time daily praying and meditating on Psalm 27:1 can strengthen our trust in God. Repeating the verse and reflecting on its deeper meaning can be very powerful. By focusing on David's words and applying them to our own lives, we can find a source of strength and hope. Plus, there are many practical techniques for incorporating this verse into our daily lives. Writing down the verse and carrying it with you, or setting daily reminders to reflect on it, are effective ways to keep its message present in our minds and hearts. By doing this, we can constantly remind ourselves of God's promise of protection and guidance, what will enable us to overcome whatever obstacles life may present. As this part comes to an end, it is clear that Psalm 271 is a powerful declaration of faith in God. David shows us that we can overcome any fear or difficulty if we trust God to be our strength, light, and salvation. This poem provides us applicable and useful lessons for our daily lives in addition to its profound historical and theological importance. It reminds us that just like David, we can find strength and hope in our faith in God. Number 3, Isaiah chapter 41, verse 10. Isaiah 41:10 is a deeply comforting and comforting verse written by the prophet Isaiah during a time of great turbulence and crisis for Israel. This verse is intended to provide encouragement and security, and Isaiah, one of the greatest prophets, carried his message at a time when Israel was faced the threat of invasion and exile. In the midst of these difficulties, Isaiah conveyed God's promise to be with his people, offering them comfort and hope. The verse begins with a powerful statement. "Do not be afraid, because I am with you." This phrase is a reaffirmation of God's constant presence. The invitation not to fear is directly linked to the certainty that God is present to believers. This presence of God is an inexhaustible source of security and comfort. Knowing that God is with us in every moment of our lives removes fear and gives us the confidence to face any challenge. The next part of the verse, "Do not lose heart, for I am your God, who strengthens you," offers a message of encouragement and strength. Here God not only promises his presence, but also his strength. The invitation not to faint is a call to trust in the strength that God provides in times of weakness and discouragement. This promise of divine strength can be a firm anchor. Biblical and contemporary narratives are filled with examples of how God has strengthened his people in times of need. In addition to promising his presence and strength, God assures his people that he will always help and sustain them. "I will always help you. I will always uphold you with the right hand of my righteousness." This promise is a reminder that we are not alone in our struggles. The right hand of my righteousness symbolizes God's power and faithfulness throughout history, both in the Bible and in contemporary testimonies in the Bible. Examples of persons who have encountered God's support and assistance at pivotal times in their life are provided. "Fear not, for I am with you." Since applying this passage to our contemporary life may have a profoundly transformational effect, it might be seen as a call to confront our modern anxieties, like financial instability, medical issues, or interpersonal disputes, with the assurance that God is with us. Testimonies of people who have conquered overwhelming concerns by putting their faith in God's presence may give us courage and inspiration. They serve as a reminder that the promise of God's presence is just as valid now as it was in biblical times. We may better absorb this verse's lessons by reflecting on it spiritually and meditating on it. Our faith and bravery may be strengthened by setting aside time each day to pray and reflect on Isaiah 41 verse 10. Prayer is a powerful tool for asking for strength and remembering God's presence in times of discouragement. In addition to practical methods for concentrating on promises of support and God's nourishment, contemplative reading and repeating affirmations based on the passage may provide us enduring serenity and strength when we repeat the verse and consider its deeper significance. These practices help us stay connected to God and remember his promise to be with us, always giving us the strength to face any challenge, thus ending this challenge. Spending time reading and reflecting on Isaiah 41:10 and allowing its words to pierce deeply into our hearts and minds can give us lasting peace and strength. Section Isaiah 41 verse 10 is a verse that offers us unshakable comfort and assurance. Remember that God is always with us, ready to strengthen, help, and sustain us. This promise not only has deep historical and theological significance, but also offers practical teachings relevant to our daily lives, assures us that, like the people of Israel in Isaiah's day, we can find comfort and strength in our faith in God. Number 4, Psalm chapter 56 verse 3. Psalm 56 verse 3 was written by David during a time of great distress and danger, possibly when he was captured by the Philistines in Gath. This historical text is crucial to understanding the depth of David's trust in God in the midst of fear and insecurity. David found refuge in his faith. This psalm, like many others written by David, reflects their intimate relationship and dependence on God. The first part of the verse, "When I fear," recognizes that fear is a real and present emotion in David's life. He does not deny the existence of fear, but confronts it directly. This acceptance of fear is fundamental to spiritual life, since recognizing our emotions is the first step to overcoming them. David shows us that it is human to experience fear, but he also teaches us that there is a way to face it. David's answer to fear is clear in you, I will trust. This statement shows David's resolve to trust God despite his fear. Trust in God is presented as a conscious choice. Rather than succumbing to fear, David chooses to put his trust in God. This choice is an act of faith and a reminder that trust in God can provide us with an anchor in times of uncertainty and fear. The need to trust God repeatedly, not just once, is another important lesson from this verse. Life is full of continual challenges, and trust in God must be constantly renewed. David had multiple occasions in his life to renew his trust in God. From confronting Goliath to fleeing from Saul, each challenge was an opportunity for David to reaffirm his faith and his trust in divine help. We can apply this verse in our modern lives as we face our contemporary fears, such as economic uncertainty, health problems, or interpersonal conflicts. David's statement, "When I fear you, I will trust," can be a guide for us. By trusting in God's presence and support, we can overcome our fears and find peace in the midst of the storm. There are countless contemporary examples of people who have overcome great fears by trusting in God's presence. Stories of individuals who, by trusting in the promise of God's presence, have overcome significant fears in their lives, can serve as inspiration and strength for us. These testimonies remind us that the promise of God's presence is as relevant today as it was in biblical times. Spiritual reflection and meditation on this verse can help us internalize its teachings. Prayer is a powerful tool to ask for strength and remembering God's presence in times of fear. Taking time each day to pray and meditate on Psalm chapter 56. Verse 3 can strengthen our faith and courage. Repeating the verse and reflecting on its deeper meaning can provide us with lasting peace and strengthening. Practical techniques for meditating on the promise to trust in God include contemplative reading and repeating affirmations based on the verse, taking the time to read, and reflecting on Psalm chapter 56, verse 3, allowing his words to penetrate deeply into our hearts and minds can provide us with lasting peace and strength. These practices help us stay connected to God and remember his promise to be with us, always giving us the strength to face any challenge. Concluding this section, Psalm chapter 56, verse 3, teaches us that fear is an inevitable part of life. However, it also demonstrates that there is a method to handle anxiety. David's words, "When I fear in you, I will trust," serve as a potent reminder that having faith in God may provide us stability during uncertain and frightening times. This passage provides us useful lessons applicable to our everyday lives in addition to its profound historical and theological importance. It reassures us that, like David, we may find hope and strength in our lives. Faith in God. Number 5, Philippians chapter 4, verses 6 to 7. The Apostle Paul wrote the letter to the Philippians from prison, a place of extreme trial and difficulty despite his situation. Paul addressed words of encouragement and exhortation to the believers in Philippi who were also facing persecution and hardship. This context highlights the depth of Paul's message and its relevance in times of distress and worry. Paul begins with a clear exhortation, "Do not be anxious about anything." This phrase calls us not to worry or be anxious about the circumstances of life. Anxiety can be debilitating, and Paul invites us to replace it with an inner peace that comes from trusting in God. Peace is fundamental in the life of the believer, and finding it in the midst of anxiety is a challenge that Paul addresses directly. Prayer is presented as the antidote to anxiety. Paul urges us to take our requests to God in all prayer and prayer with thanksgiving. This focus on thanksgiving is crucial, as it helps us focus on God's blessings rather than our worries. Prayer connects us to God, allows us to express our concerns, and helps us find peace and clarity in our lives. Your minds and emotions will be protected by the unfathomable peace of God in Christ Jesus. It is said that this serenity is supernatural, that it is beyond our comprehension, that it guards our hearts and minds, that it keeps us calm in the face of life's storms and steadfast in our faith. Stories of people who have found peace and comfort through prayer are inspiring examples of how this promise can manifest in our lives. Spiritual reflection and meditation on this verse can help us internalize its teachings, use prayer as a daily tool to seek God's peace, and remembering his constant presence can be a practice that strengthens our faith and spirit. By trusting God and bringing our worries to Him, we can experience transformative peace in modern life, apply for nothing, be anxious, and be profoundly transformative. We can change our perspective and give us new hope by bringing our worries to Him. We may fortify our faith and soul by setting aside time each day to pray and reflect on Philippians 4 verse 6. We may find enduring strength and serenity by reciting the line and considering its deeper significance. Reciting affirmations based on the passage and engaging in contemplative reading are useful methods for reflecting on God's gift of peace. Philippians 4 verses 6 to 7 may provide us enduring peace and strength if we take the time to read and consider it, letting its contents seep into our hearts and thoughts. Although anxiety is an unavoidable aspect of life, Paul's advice to not worry but to offer our concerns to God in private illustrates that there is a method to cope with it in Philippians 4 verses 6 to 7. The Apostle Paul wrote the second letter to Timothy at a pivotal point in his ministry. Timothy, a young leader in the church in Ephesus, faced many difficulties. Paul, as his mentor, sought to strengthen and encourage Timothy with words of wisdom and spiritual support. In this context, Paul reminded Timothy that fear and cowardice do not come from God, but that God has given him a spirit of power, love, and self-control. Prayer offers us a path to peace and tranquility. This verse not only has historical and theological significance, but it also offers practical lessons applicable to our daily lives. Paul starts off by confirming why God hasn't endowed us with the spirit of authority, cowardice. This statement is essential to comprehending the nature of the spirit that God bestows. Fear and cowardice are not traits of believers because they are not derived from God. Understanding that fear is not a quality of God enables us to approach it from a different angle, seeking strength in our faith and in the divine presence. Paul's reference to the spirit of power refers to the divine ability to overcome obstacles and carry out God's will. This power is neither human nor limited. Rather, it is the power of God working through us. Paul guarantees that all believers have access to this power, and numerous biblical examples, such as Moses parting the Red Sea or David defeating Goliath, demonstrate how God's power is displayed in believers who trust in Him. Love is another component. The third quality of the Spirit that God has given us is self-control, which is the ability to control our emotions, thoughts, and actions. This is a crucial discipline in the Christian life because it enables us to live in accordance with God's will and resist temptations. Techniques like prayer, meditation, and Bible study can help strengthen this virtue in our daily lives. Love is a transforming force that comes from God. It not only strengthens the individual but also builds up the community of faith. The relationship between love and courage is evident since perfect love casts out fear. When we are inspired by love, we find the courage to act on behalf of others and ourselves. Applying this verse to our modern lives can be incredibly transformative. Facing contemporary challenges like job insecurity, family issues, or health issues with the assurance that God has given us a spirit of power, love, and self-control can change our perspective and give us new hope. Stories of people who have found courage and strength in this verse are inspirational examples of how this promise can manifest in our lives. There are countless examples of people who have overcome great fears by trusting in the promise of this verse. Stories of people who have acted with courage and love after remembering this promise can serve as inspiration and strength for us. These testimonies remind us that the Spirit God has given us is as relevant today as it was in biblical times. Spiritual reflection and meditation on this verse can help us internalize its teachings, use prayer as a daily tool to seek God's peace, and remembering His constant presence can be a practice that strengthens our faith and courage. Taking time repeating the verse and reflecting on its deeper meaning can provide us with lasting peace and strength. Practical techniques for meditating on God's promise of peace include contemplative reading and repeating affirmations based on the verse, taking the time to read and reflect on 2 Timothy chapter 1 verse 7. Allowing us to their words penetrate deeply into our hearts and minds can provide us with lasting peace and strength. These practices help us stay connected to God and remember His promise to be with us, always giving us the strength to face any challenge. Concluding this section 2, Timothy chapter 1 verse 7 teaches us that God has given us a spirit of power, love, and self-control. Do not originate from God, and that we may trust Him to give us the strength and confidence to confront any difficulty, assuring us that, like Timothy, we may find strength and hope in our trust in God. This passage has profound historical and theological importance in addition to providing us with applicable and useful lessons for our everyday lives. Moses, number 7, Deuteronomy 31 verse 6. He addresses the Israelites as he nears the end of his life. Before they enter the promised land, passing leadership to Joshua, this historical context is crucial to understanding the depth of Moses' words in Deuteronomy 31 verse 6. The Israelites were about to face great challenges in the conquest of the promised land and needed to remember God's faithfulness to maintain their strength and courage. Moses begins with a clear exhortation: be strong and courageous. This phrase underscores that fortitude and courage are essential to face the challenges ahead. Strength and courage are not just personal qualities, but are deeply rooted in trust in God and His faithfulness. Moses wants the people of Israel to understand that their strength comes not only from their human capacity, but from their relationship with God. Fear and intimidation are natural emotions, but Moses warns the people that you should not fear your enemies. Do not be afraid, or afraid of them. Fear can paralyze and weaken faith. But Moses calls you to trust in God's presence and power for believers. This is an important lesson on how to face and overcome fear through prayer, meditation, and trusting in God's promises. We can find the strength to overcome our own anxieties and promises. The promise of God's constant presence is a central theme in this verse because the Lord your God is the one who goes with you. This is a comforting promise that God will be with them every step of the way, offering guidance and protection. Biblical examples of God's presence with His people, such as the pillar of fire and cloud that guided the Israelites in the wilderness, show constant faithfulness. This promise is as relevant today as it was in biblical times, assuring us that we are not alone in our challenges. Applying this verse in our modern lives can be profoundly transformative. Facing contemporary challenges such as health issues, work difficulties, or personal conflict with the confidence that God is present and faithful can change our perspective and give us new hope. Stories of individuals who have found strength and courage in this verse are inspiring testimonies of how this promise can be manifested in our lives. There are countless examples of people who have overcome great challenges because of their faith in God's presence and faithfulness. Stories of individuals who, by remembering this promise, have overcome significant fears and acted with courage and love, can serve as inspiration and strength for us. These testimonies remind us that the Spirit God has given us is as relevant today as it was in biblical times. Spiritual reflection and meditation on this verse can help us internalize its teachings, use prayer as a daily tool to ask for strength, and remember God's constant presence. It can be a practice that strengthens our faith and courage. Taking daily time to pray and meditate on Deuteronomy 31 verse 6 can strengthen our faith and courage. Repeating the verse and reflecting on its deeper meaning can provide us with lasting peace and strength. Practical techniques for meditating on the promise of God's faithfulness include contemplative reading and repeating affirmations based on the verse. Taking the time to read and reflect on Deuteronomy 31 verse 6, allowing its words deep into our hearts and minds to provide us with peace and understanding of the truth. In conclusion, Deuteronomy 31 verse 6 reminds us that we must be strong and courageous, trusting in God's faithfulness, reminding us that fear and cowardice do not come from God, and that we can face any challenge with courage and confidence in Him. These practices help us stay connected to God and remember His promise to be with us, always giving us the strength to face any challenge. The passage contains useful lessons that are applicable to our everyday lives in addition to its profound historical and spiritual relevance. It reassures us that our trust in God can give us hope and strength, just as it did for the Israelites during Moses' time. Number 8. Psalm 34, verse 4. David penned Psalm 34 at a period of extreme sorrow, maybe when he feigned to be insane in order to get out of Abimelech's grasp. This historical background is essential to comprehending the extent of David's trust in God during his time of despair and fear. This psalm reflects his own experience of being completely dependent on God for his protection and deliverance. The verse begins, "I sought the Lord," which demonstrates David's intentional action of seeking God during his time of fear. Seeking God involves not only asking for help, but also approaching him with faith and trust in his power and love for believers. This is a crucial lesson on how to face our fears, actively seek God, and trust his answer. God's response to David's search is immediate, and he heard him. God hears and responds to those who sincerely seek him. Biblical stories such as Anne's request for a son and God's answer to his prayer demonstrate God's faithfulness. Applying this verse to our modern lives can be profoundly transformative. When we face modern fears like uncertainty, health issues, or personal conflicts, actively seeking God in prayer and meditation can change our perspective and give us new hope. We can strengthen our faith and confidence in times of fear and anxiety by listening to and responding to this certainty that God hears us. Freedom from fear is another important aspect of the verse, and freed me from all my fears. The deliverance from fears is a sign of God's power and grace. God not only listens but acts to free his children from their fears. Stories of individuals who have found freedom from fear by seeking God are inspiring testimonies of how this promise can manifest in our lives. There are countless contemporary examples of people who have overcome great fears by trusting in the promise of this verse. Stories of individuals who, by remembering this promise, have overcome significant fears and acted with courage and love, can serve as inspiration and strength for us. These testimonies remind us that God's promise to free us from our fears is as relevant today as it was in biblical times. Spiritual reflection and meditation on this verse can help us internalize its teachings, use prayer as a daily tool to seek God's peace, and remembering his constant presence can be a practice that strengthens our faith and courage. Taking time daily to pray and meditate on Psalm chapter 34 verse 4 can strengthen our faith. Encourage repeating the verse and reflecting on its deeper meaning can provide us with lasting peace and strength. Practical techniques for meditating on God's promise of deliverance include contemplative reading and repeating affirmations based on the verse. Taking the time to read and reflect on Psalm chapter 34 verse 4, allowing its words to penetrate deeply into our hearts and minds, can provide us with lasting peace and strength. These practices help us stay connected to God and remember his promise to be with us, always giving us the strength to face any challenge. Concluding this section, Psalm chapter 34, verse 4, teaches us that seeking God is a way to be with God. Essential to finding deliverance from fear, reminds us that God hears our prayers and acts to free us from our fears. This verse not only has deep historical and theological significance, but also offers practical teachings relevant to our daily lives. Assures us that, like David, we can find strength and hope in our faith in God. New Isaiah 4:31. The prophet Isaiah wrote, during a time of great challenge to Israel, including the threat of exile and destruction. This historical context is crucial to understanding the depth of Isaiah's words. In Isaiah 4:31, God's promises through Isaiah offered hope and security in the midst of uncertainty and fear in times of crisis. Isaiah's words of comfort and redemption resonated deeply in the hearts of the people of Israel. The verse begins with the statement, "Now." Thus it says, "The Lord your creator Jacob and your formator Israel." God presents himself as the creator and shaper of Israel, establishing his authority and intimate relationship with his people. This presentation is crucial as it reminds the Israelites that God, who created and formed them, has a deep interest and love for them. Recognizing God as our creator reminds us of his power and his constant love for us, providing a solid foundation for our faith and trust. The command not to fear is central to this verse. "Do not fear, because I have redeemed you." God offers a clear command not to fear based on the reality that he has already redeemed his people. Redemption is an act of deliverance and salvation for the Israelites. This redemption was a reminder of deliverance from slavery in Egypt and a promise of continued deliverance. The relationship between the Israelites and the Israelites, knowing that we have been redeemed and that we are God's property, allows us to feel comfortable and at ease in His care and protection, which is a strong indication of divine redemption and the elimination of fear. The promise of protection and belonging is highlighted in the phrase, "I put my name, it is you." God reaffirms His ownership over us by giving us a name and assuring us that we belong to Him. This promise is deeply comforting, since knowing that we belong to God gives us a sense of secure identity and a sense of purpose and protection in the midst of uncertainty and fear. This certainty of belonging provides us with a solid foundation for our faith, and confidently applying this verse in our modern lives can be profoundly transformative, facing contemporary challenges such as health problems, work difficulties, or personal conflicts. With the confidence that God has redeemed us and is with us, can change our perspective and give us a new hope. Stories of individuals who have found peace and confidence in this promise are inspiring testimonies of how this truth can manifest in our lives. There are countless contemporary examples of people who have overcome great fears by trusting in the promise of this verse, stories of individuals who, by remembering this promise, have overcome significant fears and have acted with courage and love, can serve as inspiration and strength for us. These testimonies remind us that God's promise to redeem and protect us is as relevant today as it was in biblical times. We may better absorb this verse's lessons by reflecting on it spiritually and meditating on it. As a daily reminder, use prayer. Our trust and bravery may be strengthened by practicing God's redemption and unwavering presence. Every day, set aside time to pray and meditate on Jesse 43. Reciting the line and considering its deeper significance may give us enduring strength and serenity. It can also build our faith and spirits. We can find peace and relaxation by reading and reflecting on Isaiah 43. 1. Allowing His words to linger in our hearts and minds, and repeating affirmations based on the verse. These practical methods for meditating on God's promise of protection and belonging are also helpful. Durable strength. These exercises keep us close to God and remind us of His assurance that He will always be there for us, providing us with the courage to overcome any obstacle. God has rescued us and called us by name, therefore we have to be afraid. Recall that God provides us with protection and a sense of identity as our Creator and Redeemer. This passage promises us that, like the people of Israel in Isaiah's day, we may find strength and hope in our lives. It also has profound historical and theological importance and provides us with applicable and useful lessons for our everyday lives. Psalm 23, chapter 4, and our trust in God, number 10. David, who was well known for being a shepherd before ascending to the throne, used the shepherd analogy in Psalm 23 to describe his connection with God. Through this pastoral experience, he was able to deeply and personally comprehend and communicate God's care and protection. David's historical background as a shepherd offers a strong basis for comprehending his faith in God. God as your guide and protector. The verse begins with a phrase, "Although you walk in the valley of the shadow of death," which recognizes the existence of dark and dangerous moments in life. This valley of the shadow of death symbolizes the most challenging and terrifying situations we can face. Recognizing these dark moments is essential to understanding the need to trust in divine guidance and protection. David does not deny the reality of danger, but rather he faces it with a firm faith in God. David expresses absolute trust in God with the statement, "I will fear no evil." This statement shows that even in the darkest moments, David does not fear any evil because he fully trusts in God. The relationship between trust in God and overcoming fear is seer. Trust in God allows to overcome fear and face challenges with courage. For David, the presence of God is the key to maintaining this trust. The phrase, "because you will be with me," underscores that God's presence is the reason for David's trust. Knowing that God is with him provides comfort and assurance. This divine presence is not only comforting, but also protective. Biblical examples of God's comforting presence, such as the story of Daniel in the lion's den or the 3 young men in the fiery furnace, demonstrate how divine protection can manifest itself in the midst of danger. These stories reinforce the idea that God is always present to protect and guide his people. God's guidance and protection are symbolized in the phrase, "Your rod and your silence infuse me with great breath." The rod and the silent are shepherds' tools that symbolize God's guidance and protection. The rod represents the defense against danger and the quiet guidance and direction. These tools are powerful symbols of how God continually guides and protects us, and guiding us provides us with profound peace and security. Applying this verse in our modern lives can be profoundly transformative, facing contemporary challenges such as health problems, work difficulties, or personal conflicts with the confidence that God is present and faithful can change our perspective and give us new hope. Narratives of people who have drawn bravery and power from this passage serve as motivational examples of how this promise might materialize in our lives. Numerous modern-day instances exist of individuals who have conquered significant obstacles by putting their faith in this verse's promise. We may draw strength and inspiration from the stories of people who have overcome great anxieties and behaved bravely and lovingly by keeping this promise in mind. Remind us that God's promise to guide and protect us is as relevant today as it was in biblical times. Spiritual reflection and meditation on this verse can help us internalize its teachings, using prayer as a daily tool to ask for strength and remembering God's constant presence. It can be a practice that strengthens our faith and courage. Taking time daily to pray and meditate on Psalm 23 verse 4 can strengthen our faith and courage. Repeating the verse and reflecting on its deeper meaning can provide us with lasting peace and strength. Practical techniques for meditating on God's promise of God's protection and guidance include contemplative reading and repeating affirmations based on the verse. Taking the time to read and reflect on Psalm 23 verse for allowing its words to penetrate deeply into our hearts and minds can to provide us with lasting peace and strength. These practices help us stay connected to God and remember his promise to be with us, always giving us the strength to face any challenge. Psalm 23 verse 4 concludes this portion by teaching us that we may trust in God's protection and direction even in the face of gloomy and perilous times. And protection are constant. This verse not only has deep historical and theological significance, but it also offers practical teachings relevant to our daily lives. It assures us that, like David, we can find strength and hope in our faith in God. Number 11, Matthew 6 verse 34. Matthew 6 verse 34 is part of the Sermon on the Mount, a foundational teaching of Jesus that addresses various aspects of life and faith. Jesus, speaking to his disciples and the crowd, offers direction and comfort, inviting believers to trust God and not worry too much about the future. This context is crucial to understanding the depth and relevance of Jesus' words. The verse begins with the exhortation, "So, don't worry about tomorrow." Jesus underscores the importance of not worrying about the future, emphasizing that excessive worry can steal the peace and joy of the present. This teaching is a call to live with a deep trust in God's providence and care. Excessive worry often indicates a lack of confidence in God's ability to provide and care for us. Jesus goes on to say, "Why tomorrow will bring its own worry." Here, Jesus emphasizes that each day has its own challenges and worries. It is wise to face them one at a time without adding more burdens by worrying about the future. Living in the present allows us to experience God's grace and care day by day. This approach not only eases the burden of the future, but also helps us maintain a healthy and balanced perspective. The sufficiency of God's grace for each day is another central theme in this verse. Enough to each day its own evil. Applying this verse to our modern lives can be profoundly transformative. Dealing with contemporary challenges like health issues, work difficulties, or personal conflicts with the confidence that God is present and faithful can change our perspective and give us new hope. Jesus emphasizes that every day brings with it enough challenges and that it is not necessary to add more concern for the future. This teaching emphasizes the importance of trusting in God's daily provision. Biblical and contemporary examples of people who have experienced the sufficiency of God's grace in their daily lives are powerful testimonies to this truth. Stories of people who have trusted in God's provision and witnessed His faithfulness in action. Stories of individuals who have found peace and confidence in this promise are inspiring testimonies of how this truth can be manifested in our lives. There are countless contemporary examples of people who have overcome great fears and worries by trusting in the promise of this verse, stories of individuals who, by remembering this promise, have overcome significant fears and acted with courage and love, can serve as inspiration and strength to us. These testimonies remind us that God's promise to provide for and care for us is as relevant today as it was in biblical times. Spiritual reflection and meditation on this verse can help us internalize its teachings. Using prayer as a daily tool to remember God's provision and constant presence can be a practice that strengthens our faith and courage. Taking time daily to pray and meditate on Matthew 6, verse 34, can strengthen our faith and courage. Repeating the verse and reflecting on its deeper meaning can provide us with peace and strength. Reciting verse-based affirmations and reading concurrently are two enduring practical methods for reflecting on the promise of God's provision. We may find enduring strength and serenity by taking the time to read and consider Matthew 6, verse 34, allowing His words to linger in our hearts and thoughts. These routines assist us in remembering God's promise to always be with us and in maintaining our relationship with Him, giving us the strength to face any challenge. Concluding this section, Matthew 6, verse 34 teaches us that we should not worry about tomorrow, as each day brings its own challenges. Reminds us that trusting in God's provision and care allows us to live in peace and security. This verse not only has deep historical and theological significance, but also offers practical and relevant teachings for our lives. Daily assurance that, like the disciples in Jesus' time, we can find strength and hope in our faith in God. Number 12, Psalm chapter 91, verses 1 to 2. Psalm 91 is known as a hymn of protection and trust in God, and although its authorship is not clearly established, it is frequently attributed to Moses or David. This historical context is crucial to understand the depth and relevance of this psalm in times of danger and crisis. This psalm has served as a spiritual refuge for many, offering comfort and assurance in divine protection. Verse 1 begins with the phrase, "He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High," which implies an intimate and constant relationship with God. Dwelling in the shelter of the Most High means His presence and protection daily. Being in the presence of God provides a refuge. Closeness to God is essential to finding shelter and security. The second part of verse 1, "will dwell under the shadow of the Almighty," symbolizes God's constant and powerful protection. God's shadow is a refuge from dangers and attacks, providing a safe and quiet place. This symbolism reminds us that God's protection is constant and always available to those who trust in Him. To dwell under His shadow is to live in His protection and security. The confession of trust in God is found in verse 2, "I will say to the Lord, my refuge and my strength." This personal confession of faith shows trust in God as the only true refuge and strength. The importance of declaring our trust in God aloud cannot be underestimated. Declaring our faith strengthens our God's faithfulness, is a powerful affirmation that strengthens us spiritually. Total dependence on God is reflected in the phrase, "my God, in whom I will trust." This statement of total dependence on God shows unwavering faith and full assurance in His protection. Biblical and contemporary examples of dependence on God abound, showing how faith in God has led many people to experience His protection and provision. Using this verse in our contemporary life may have a profoundly transformational effect. These tales serve as a source of inspiration and support for our own faith. Seeking God's protection and presence on a daily basis may help us adjust our viewpoint and find fresh hope when we face modern concerns like health issues, work-related difficulties, or personal disputes. Inspiring accounts of people who have found safety and security in God show us how this promise might be realized in our own lives. There are many instances of individuals today who have trusted in the promise of this scripture and overcome significant obstacles and risks. We may draw courage and inspiration from the stories of those who have found serenity and safety in the face of overwhelming adversity by keeping this promise in mind. These accounts serve as a reminder that God's pledge to keep us safe is just as applicable now as it was in the Bible. Spiritual reflection and meditation on this verse can help us internalize its teachings, using prayer as a daily tool to ask for strength and remembering God's constant presence can be a practice that strengthens our faith and courage. Taking time each day to pray and meditate on Psalm 90 and 1:1, 2 can strengthen our faith and courage. Repeating the verse and reflecting on its deeper meaning can give us peace and lasting strength. Reading and reflecting on Psalm 90 and 1 verses 1-2 endo, and letting his words sink deeply into our hearts and minds can give us peace and lasting strength. These practices help us stay connected to God. It serves as a reminder that God is our strength and sanctuary and that we can completely depend on him to keep us safe. This passage not only has great theological and historical value, but it also shows that the Almighty can protect us. It also offers practical teachings relevant to our daily lives, assures us that, like believers in the time of David Moses, we can find strength and hope in our faith in God. Number 13, John 14, verse 27. John 14, verse 27 is part of Jesus' farewell address to his disciples during the Last Supper before his arrest and crucifixion. This context is crucial to understanding the depth and relevance of Jesus' words in a time of great uncertainty and fear for his disciples. Jesus offers them comfort and peace, knowing that they will face difficult times without his physical presence. This promise of peace was not only for the disciples at that time, but also for all believers throughout time. The verse begins with the statement, "Peace, I leave you my peace, I give you." Jesus stresses that the peace he offers is different from the peace that the world can offer. The peace of Christ is deep and lasting, a peace that transcends circumstances and provides an inner stability that does not depend on external factors. The peace that Jesus leaves and gives is one of the greatest blessings for believers, assuring them that no matter the circumstances, they can have a peace that is beyond human comprehension. Jesus goes on to say, "I do not give it to you as the world gives it." This distinction is important. For the peace of the world is temporary and superficial, while the peace of Christ is eternal and deep. The peace of the world can depend on favorable external situations, while the peace of Christ is maintained. There are many instances in the Bible and elsewhere of Christians experiencing the peace of Christ even in the midst of life storms. Stories like those of modern individuals who have remained calm in the face of major catastrophes or Christian martyrs who faced death with composure demonstrate how the peace of Christ may keep us going in any situation. The statement, "Do not be troubled or afraid," is Jesus' way of telling us not to be fearful. Jesus encourages his followers to put their faith in his peace and not allow their hearts to be unsettled or afraid. This invitation is an appeal for faith and confidence in the promises and presence of Christ. Prayer, meditation, and introspection are methods for putting this lesson into practice in our everyday lives. They strengthen our faith and enable us to connect with Christ's peace. Applying this passage to our contemporary lives may be quite beneficial. Even during trying times, when we face modern obstacles like health issues, career setbacks, or interpersonal disputes, putting our faith in the serenity that Christ provides may transform our viewpoint and provide fresh hope. Tales of people who have found solace and serenity in this promise serve as motivational examples of how we might use this fact in our lives. They serve as a reminder that the peace of Christ is just as applicable now as it was throughout the time of the Bible. Countless contemporary examples of people who have overcome great fears and worries by trusting in the promise of this verse, stories of individuals who by remembering this promise have found peace and protection in the midst of great challenges can serve as inspiration and strength for us. These testimonies remind us that the peace of Christ is a tangible reality that can transform our lives. Spiritual reflection and meditation on this verse can help us to internalize its teachings. Use prayer As a daily tool to remember the peace of Christ and his constant presence can be a practice that strengthens our faith. Encouraged to spend daily time praying and meditating on John 14 verse 27 can strengthen our faith. Encourage repeating the verse and reflecting on its deeper meaning can provide us with lasting peace and strength. Practical techniques for meditating on the promise of Christ's peace. They include contemplative reading and repeating affirmations based on the verse, taking the time to read and reflect on John 14 verse 27. Allowing his words to penetrate deep into our hearts and minds can provide us with lasting peace and strength. These practices help us stay connected to Christ and remember his promise to be with us, always giving us the strength to face any challenge. Concluding the section, John 14 verse 27, it teaches us that the peace of Christ is a priceless gift that helps us face fear and anxiety. Recall that the peace of Christ is distinct from the peace of the world because it is profound, timeless, and unchanging. This verse has profound historical and theological significance, but it also provides us with applicable and useful lessons for our everyday lives and reassures us that, like the disciples in the past, it is true that the peace of Christ is distinct from the peace of the world. From Jesus, we can find strength and hope in our faith in Christ and in the peace he offers us. Number 14, 1 Peter chapter 5 verse 7. Peter's first letter was written to encourage Christians who were facing persecution and hardship. Peter, as a church leader, offers practical and spiritual guidance for facing the jada of life. In this context, his words in 1 Peter chapter 5 verse 7 are especially meaningful for those who struggle with anxieties and worries. Peter invites believers to surrender their anxieties to God by trusting in his love and care. The verse begins with the exhortation, "Cast all your anxiety upon him." The action of casting involves an active transference of our worries to God, trusting in his ability to handle our burdens. This action requires a deliberate act of surrender and faith, recognizing that our worries are better handled by God than by ourselves. The importance of trusting God with our worries cannot be underestimated, as this trust frees us from the weight of our anxieties and allows us to live with greater peace and freedom. The reason for surrendering our anxieties to God is found in the second part of the verse. Because he cares for you, God cares deeply for us and is attentive to our needs and concerns. This divine care is manifested in many ways, both in the Bible and in our lives. Biblical examples of God's concern and care for his people include the provision of manna in the wilderness for the Israelites and God's care for Elijah during the drought. These stories show God's constant faithfulness and concern for those who trust in him, the relationship between God and the relationship between God. Another important part of the poem is giving our troubles to God and finding inner peace. When we do this, we experience a calm that is beyond human understanding. We are able to live in peace and confidence that we would not otherwise be able to because of this relief from our difficulties. Faith is central to this process, as trusting that God truly cares and acts on our behalf is essential to experiencing this peace. Applying this verse in our modern lives can be profoundly formative. Facing contemporary challenges such as health problems, work difficulties, or personal conflicts, surrendering these concerns to God can change our perspective and give us new hope. Stories of individuals who have found peace and freedom by surrendering their anxieties to God are inspiring. Testimonies of how this truth can manifest in our lives. These testimonies remind us that God's promise to care for us is as relevant today as it was in biblical times. There are countless contemporary examples of people who have overcome great fears and worries by trusting in the promise of this verse, stories of individuals who, by remembering this promise, have found peace and protection in the midst of great challenges, can serve as inspiration and strength for us. These testimonies remind us that God's promise to care for us is not enough. Self-defense is a practical reality that has the power to change our lives. We may better absorb this verse's lessons by reflecting on it spiritually and meditating on it. As a daily reminder, use prayer. Our trust and bravery may be strengthened by practicing God's promise to look out for us. On 1. Set aside time each day for meditation and prayer. Verse 7 of Peter, May 5th, bolster our bravery and trust. and reflecting on its deeper meaning can provide us with lasting peace and strength. Practical techniques for meditating on the promise of God's care include contemplative reading and repeating affirmations based on the verse, taking the time to read and reflect on 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 7. Allowing his words to penetrate deep into our hearts and minds can provide us with lasting peace and strength. These practices help us to keep us connected to God and to remember his promise to be with us, always giving us the strength necessary to face any challenge. Flowing this section, 1 Peter chapter 5 verse 7 teaches us that we must surrender our anxieties to God, trusting that he cares for us. He reminds us that God cares deeply about our needs and concerns, and that we can trust in his love and faithfulness. This verse not only has a deep, it also offers practical teachings relevant to our daily lives, assures us that, like believers in Peter's day, we can find strength and hope in our faith in God. I invite you to reflect on these verses and allow their teachings to permeate your daily life. You may get the courage and optimism you need to handle any circumstance by meditating on God's word. You will find solace and inspiration in these words of bravery, love, and faith. I urge you to subscribe to our channel if this video has been helpful and these words have been valuable to you. You will be helping to create more material that aims to inspire you every day and build your faith by subscribing. Remember that learning and growing closer to God is a continuous and fulfilling journey. My videos help people of all ages get closer to God by rediscovering forgotten teachings and deepening the divine word. If you have reached the end of this video, it shows that you are a dedicated person committed to spiritual growth and getting closer to God. Keep seeking wisdom and working to strengthen your faith and your relationship with God. I encourage you to leave a comment saying, "I am closer to God," to let us know that you have come this far and that you are on this journey of faith with us.